Today I want to talk about Einstein's spooky action at a distance. What is it and why is it spooky? Well, in a nutshell, last century Albert Einstein, with some other people, discovered that two or more particles that have become entangled by sharing spatial proximity have a relational connection when they're separated. Photons, neutrinos, electrons, molecules, and even small diamonds have shown this effect. What does that mean? Let's look at it like this. Let's say there are two photons. They come together, they start getting entangled with each other, have a romantic relationship, and then, they must be taken apart. If you change one of the separated entangled particles, there's an instantaneous change in the other one, even if the distances are light years apart. Now they know this to be true. There's basically a spin relationship. So if this one, the spin is up, this one is the spin down. They always will complement each other, even when they're light years apart, once they become entangled. Now Einstein had a theory about this, and he seemed to think that possibly the photons agreed beforehand which one would have the spin up and which one would have the spin down. And then they did a lot of experiments, and Bell's theorem came about, and later they were actually to prove Bell's theorem in the Maryland experiment. And basically what this means is that if Einstein was correct and they would have agreed on it beforehand, there was a certain probability outcome of what that would be. If it was the quantum physics explanation of it, if it was a quantum effect, in other words, as soon as you change this one, instantaneously halfway across the universe, this one changes in real time, then it would have a different probability outcome. It turned out that the quantum physicists were correct, and Einstein lost on this one. Now he won on a lot of them, but he lost on this one. And I think that's what really bugged him, because this action was, he didn't know how else to explain it except that it was spooky. It's a strange phenomenon. Now in radionics, we work with this every single day. Let's look at the work of Cleve Backster. Cleve was a polygraph tester for the CIA, and you might know him from The Secret Life of Plants. He got the idea one day wondering if a plant would register on an electroencephalograph, a brainwave measuring device. So he connected up an EEG to a leaf of a plant, and actually there was a reading on the graph, and he thought, that's very amazing. So then he got this idea, what could he do to maybe get an effect from the plant? And then he thought, I guess I could burn it. And as soon as he thought that, he actually visualized that and thought, okay, he would go get a match and burn this leaf. But as soon as he thought it, the graph went off the charts. And this totally blew his mind. This was kind of his introduction into action at a distance, and also these spooky kinds of things of, what was that, mental telepathy? How could a plant read his thoughts? And so he dove in and did a lot of experiments. He has a book out that he wrote, plus two other books that other people wrote. And one of them was The Secret Life of Your Cells. Now, I met Cleve back in about 1988, I think it was. And he was showing a film at a United States Psychotronics Association conference. And the film was like this. They had taken some saliva cells from the cells of a man's mouth, and they were behind in another room with a two-way mirror. So you could see the man sitting in the waiting room. He didn't really know what the experiment was about, but he's sitting in the waiting room. They have another camera on the electroencephalograph. They connected the cells of his saliva cells to the EEG. And so you're watching the readout in the other room of the EEG. And there's a two-way mirror so they could watch him, but we were watching it on two cameras. So there's a Playboy magazine sitting on the table, on the coffee table in front of him. And of course, he's sitting there for quite a long time and finally reaches over and starts to want to look at the magazine and then pulls his hand back. But there was a little tiny blip from the cells in the other room. And then, so eventually he goes and reaches again and opens it up, and he pretends to be reading through the articles, And the waves are getting a little bit stronger and a little bit stronger. Finally, he gets to the centerfold, and he pulls open the centerfold, and the chart is just screaming, going up and down and up and down from his reaction to his cells in the other room. Now, I think that is absolutely phenomenal. So the US Army also tested the power of emotion on living cells. They hooked up some volunteers to specifically designed electrometers and then played a series of graphic video images from comedy to torture to erotica, designed to create genuine states of feeling in order to collect a broad spectrum of emotional fluctuation. Just as expected, the peaks and dips in volunteers' electrical responses coincided perfectly with the changes in emotional stimuli. The big surprise came during the next phase, in which they took tissue, again the cells, DNA swabs from the volunteers, and placed them in a vault several hundred feet away and repeated the experiment. Strangely enough, the tissue DNA samples locked hundreds of feet away still registered the same electrical peaks and dips coinciding with the donor's response to emotional video clips. Dr. Cleve Baxter more recently performed this experiment with a distance of 350 miles between the donor and his cells. Even at this extreme distance, in experiments gauged by an atomic clock, the donor and his cells still responded absolutely identically simultaneously. The fact that a donor and his DNA 350 miles away have such coincident responses suggests that the energy of the donor's emotions don't travel anywhere, but is already everywhere, as demonstrated by Bohm's holographic universe metaphor. This comes from Greg Braden, The Divine Matrix. They started using photographs in radionics instead of a blood spot back in the 1920s, verifying Einstein's and quantum physics' entanglement of photons. From almost 100 years of experience, we know that a photo works well to create a radionic or intuitive link with the subject. For example, we can analyze a subject and get real-time information from the subject at a distance. But why? How can this happen? Basically, it's due to quantum entanglement. Quantum entanglement enables particles to affect each other instantaneously across any distance. At least this is a good explanation for it. Like I said, we're using quantum physics as a model to explain something that we observe in everyday life in radionics. Entangled particles would remain connected even if they were on opposite sides of the universe. That was from a PBS special. My hypothesis is this. In order for a photo to be produced, photons must interact with the subject, the person, by actually contacting the person and bouncing off of the person, and then arriving through a lens of the camera to be either digitized through the silicon chips and then be reconstructed on a liquid crystal display, or printed on a photo paper or crystallized paper like zinc paper, which is what we use in radionics, or directly cutting the crystals on photo paper like a Polaroid Instamatic used to do. There were silver halide crystals in the film emulsion, and as the light would come in, they change frequencies. So like with this white shirt, the photons that you're seeing have bounced off of the shirt and then changed their frequency to match the color white. Whereas on my skin, the photons have struck my skin. Now it's the same kind of photons coming to both of them, but as soon as it touches my skin and bounces off, it changes the frequency of the photon. So you perceive it as a brown color or lighter color. When a photon interacts with an object, clothing, skin, etc., the spin of the photon is changed and the frequency slows down or speeds up to match the frequency of the color of the object. When this happens, the photon becomes entangled with the object, person or plant, etc., and retains a link with the object even after it enters the camera. Like I mentioned, quantum entanglement is a view from physics that could help us to understand something that we observe every single day in radionics. Einstein said, "The intuitive mind is a sacred gift, and the rational mind is a faithful servant. We have created a society that honors the servant and has forgotten the gift." So let's start using both sides of our brain, the rational side of our brain and the intuitive side of our brain. So if we can interact with a whole brain thinking using radionics as our instrument to focus our intention and to hold our intention, then we can get these spooky actions at a distance very easily. This is consciousness interactive technology. In the next section, I want to go into the theory behind scalar electromagnetics and also scalar informational fields and the difference between the two.